Welcome to Cathedral Conversations. This is a program by the Cathedral of All Saints in the City and Diocese of Albany, New York. The Cathedral of All Saints is the cathedral of the Episcopal Diocese of Albany. And from time to time, we put up on YouTube conversations that we hope you will find informative, stimulating, and inspirational. And I'm very pleased today to have with us Dr. Ian Hutchinson. Professor Hutchinson is recently retired from the Department of Nuclear Engineering and Physics at M.I.T. He has a BA from Cambridge University and a PhD from the Australian National University. He's a very distinguished scientist with over 160 publications to his credit. And Wikipedia says that his text on principles of plasma diagnostics is the standard text in that field. So, we're very pleased to have Dr. Hutchinson with us today. He's also a well-known Christian speaker on the relationship between science and religion. He speaks very often for the Veritas Forum, and you can find more of his talks on their website. And also you can find some of his talks on YouTube. He's also the author of a very significant book called Can a Scientist Believe in Miracles? And you'll find a link at the end of the video to go to that book. So I do recommend that you try to check out his other talks and also this wonderful book. Dr. Hutchinson, you began your scientific career and also your serious engagement as an adult with the Christian faith at Cambridge University. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how those two things happened and came together.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Please call me Ian, and I have a Christian name, so it's an appropriate way to address me. I grew up, as my accent betrays, in the United Kingdom. And I went to a school as a high schooler that had a nominal Christian identity and had hymns and prayers in our daily assembly. But I wasn't a Christian. My family didn't go to church. They had no Christian allegiance. And like most of the other students at my school, even though I didn't have any strong objection to the cultural Christianity that was around me, I didn't believe in it. I wouldn't have considered myself to be a Christian in any meaningful sense. When I went to Cambridge University, I went with a determination to study physics. Science had been really the thing which appealed to me most in my high school career in mathematics. But I also set out to be, in a certain sense, an intellectual. I wanted to encompass in my university experience a wide range of intellectual understanding and so forth. And since I was at King's College, Cambridge, which is, of course, famous, perhaps with Episcopalians, perhaps most famous for the Christmas Eve carols from King's that you may have heard. I was surrounded by, in a certain sense, Christian culture in the architecture and history and so forth of Cambridge University, and I grew to appreciate more than I perhaps had before, the extent to which Christianity underlay the culture which I so much appreciated, and the intellectual endeavor that I was embarked upon. But the most important thing which drew me to take Christianity more seriously than I had as a high school student was the fact that I had two college friends, co-students with me, who were both serious, committed Christians. And And that, together with the recognition that I had, which was that, in a certain sense, the secularity of our world as it was developing in those days, quite a long time ago, as a student, was actually rather unsuccessful in sustaining the sorts of principles and aspirations that I had, the discovery of truth and integrity and compassion and those kinds of things, which I think were things which I sought out as part of my life. I was held back to some degree by the fact that I thought that Christianity, if I took it seriously, would be restrictive in some of the things that I thought I wanted to do. I didn't really think that I wanted a Lord. I wanted to be the Lord of my own life, like most other people, I suppose, of that age who was trying to sort those things out. But at any rate, my friends invited me on during my second year at Cambridge to go to a series of lectures given by Michael Green about basic Christianity, and there were really a couple of major things that came as a surprise, or at least a new idea about Christianity, which which was crucial to me, because in a certain sense they were intellectual challenges. One was that actually there's a lot of very good evidence to support the claims of Christianity, the historic claims of Christianity, so that there are good intellectual reasons to believe in Christ. And the second, perhaps more important, but equally important, certainly, was the notion that Jesus invites us to a personal relationship with himself, with God, and that it in itself was not something that had been portrayed with me in my past relationships with Christians and with Christianity. And even though I knew this was a big step, and I came to realize that it was unreasonable to expect there be sort of absolute abstract proof of Christianity, if Christianity was about this personal relationship with God, and that there was some risk that a step of entering into that relationship had to be taken. And eventually I came to the point of realizing that I did believe in Christ, in the resurrection, in the broadly in the claims of Christianity, and that I wanted to respond to that call of Christ, and I did so and yielded my life to Christ, and I've tried to follow him ever since.
No, that's fascinating. A couple of things really stood out to me there. The name Michael Green, which may be unfamiliar to some people, it's somebody that I know about. Actually, met the man. I taught at a seminary, Anglican seminary, for 8 years, and Michael Green was just towards the end of his life was a visitor. Had been a great friend of that seminary over the years. Remarkable, um, just remarkable Christian witness, priest of the Church of England, and writer about mission and evangelism, and just a person whose own faith was so warm and winsome that through his ministry, many people, and many university students and university faculty were brought to faith in Christ. So that's really um, I'm overcome by a very warm memory of Michael Green.
Yes,
Uh,
he ministered in Oxford actually for many years, and was, as you say, very influential in university
yeah, and
circles.
all over. Really had a global, a global reach. The other thing, that I sort of identify with in your story is a little my own story, which was I was extremely pious as a boy, up until about the age of 12 years old. Was an altar boy and made pilgrimages on foot, and just was very pious, loved to be alone and pray, and loved everything to do with the church and the sacraments of the church. And but in high school, I had a biology teacher who was a very um, I looked up to this man very much, and he was very, very bright and very, very smart. But I kind of got the idea from him: if you were smart, you would be scientific, and if you were scientific, you would be an atheist. And this was kind of a package deal, you know. And it took me quite a long time to get over that. But it was actually also in my college years when I began to think about these things in a rigorous way. And I perceive that same thing that you said. That and this is a characteristic, I think, of the Enlightenment, which is um, the Enlightenment paradigm, or part of it anyway, is that you need to have certainty before you have commitment. And that works with some things. It doesn't work very well with relationships. And one of the things that helps me in thinking through that challenge of certainty and commitment is there was Martin Luther was asked about faith, and he said it had two components to it. One component was belief. So uh, there's uh, there's credo, I believe, right? And he said a man is drowning. He's been in a shipwreck, and he's drowning, and he sees a piece of the wreck floating by, and he believes it could hold him up, but he doesn't know that it will until he goes and puts his weight upon it and trusts in it. And I think that was sort of what I was hearing in your story of your own coming to Christian faith.
Yeah, I would actually say that there are three parts to the meaning of faith.
Okay.
Sorry to if I would expand on Luther a little bit.
Yeah.
Um,
I
you
think
know,
I know
we're
where you're
often
going. Go
we're
ahead.
we're, we're often offered these days this kind of false contrast between faith and evidence, or faith and knowledge, and so forth. And I think that that's very misleading. It is true to say that one aspect of faith is believing in, let's say, propositions. Okay. Um, but there are two others, I think, and it's worth distinguishing between them. One is that faith often means trust either in people or in things. You know, we trust the aeroplane that we fly around on to get us to a certain sense, and that's we're having in a certain sense a sense of faith in that. And but the third is as the meaning of faith is loyalty, loyalty to a person or to a principle or to a country or whatever it might be. And those three meanings of the word faith are all part of that package. And yes, of course, one of the questions that any academic wants to ask is, you know, do the propositions that surround this particular religion, Christianity, are they true? Are they plausible? But also the question becomes one: can I trust it? And thirdly, am I willing to put my loyalty in behind this? And I think those don't necessarily all come as a package, but I think that they're all an important part of things. And I think, by the way, that faith is exercised in lots of things which are not religious in our lives today. I mean, for most people, what they know about or understand about science is actually an exercise of trust in scientists, as much as it is, you know, having examined the detailed evidence for it. Very often, people, you know, the ordinary person in the street hasn't got the time or inclination to examine all of that detailed intellectual evidence, and so they put their trust in what scientists that they think are trustworthy say about things. And actually, scientists also have to do that for other disciplines. What I know about biology comes from my having taken what my colleagues at MIT and elsewhere have told me about it.
Yeah, I like that. That's well said about bringing out the aspect of loyalty. I mean that of course is a big part of the drama of the story that the Bible tells is the story of the about the loyalty and disloyalty of God's people and the utter loyalty of God to his people and the more inconstant loyalty of God's people to God. So that's very, very helpful to me. And I'm also reminded one of the people that has helped me think through the relationship between science and religion is the great scientist and philosopher Michael Polanyi. And as a scientist, makes the point that there's an element of faith in all knowing that there's sort of an act of trust which is necessary to know anything at all. And a great deal of what it means to develop and grow in a scientist is to have trust in the whole enterprise. There's really even a more foundational trust, which is there's a more foundational trust, which is you have to trust that the universe, the cosmos, has a rationality to it, and that our rationality is capable of apprehending and perceiving and grasping in some meaningful and productive way that the rationality that is there. That's not something that can be established by science. In my understanding, it's a premise that which requires an act of faith.
It is a premise, and historically, it was a very important premise right at the beginning of the scientific revolution. We're often um, offered a false dichotomy between science and religion as being somehow that they're incompatible, and therefore, a scientist can't be a person of faith. But actually, a good argument can be made for the fact that it was in large measure the biblical view of creation and of the upholding of the universe by God, by an intelligent God, the goodness of the universe, of nature, that underwrote the flourishing of the nascent scientific revolution in the West. And I think, without wanting to make too much of that, I mean, one could point to the fact that a vast proportion of the great scientists of those days, of the 17th century, and subsequently, were in fact Christians. This sometimes surprises people. They weren't just people who, gave the nod to the common religious perspectives of the day. They were people who took their faith very seriously. Right? And Isaac Newton wrote more about Bible interpretation than he did about science, not published, but wrote. And there were people like Robert Boyle, who wrote several books about the relationship between science and Christianity. Again, a 17th century scientist, one of the founders of the Royal Society. And there have been, throughout the subsequent centuries, many Christians, some of them indeed, quite a substantial proportion of them, clerics of one sort or another, who've been very important scientists as well. So
Two names come to my mind as you're talking about clerics who are also important scientists. One is, and I'm going to murder the pronunciation. Lemaitre is
pretty close to the way I would murder it.
Yeah, and can you tell us a little bit about him?
Well, he was a Catholic priest in the early 20th century, who really, in a certain sense, was the first person to propose seriously the idea that there was a big bang or a vast expansion of the early universe, and he was a theorist, and but I was aware of the developing observational science, the astronomy that was confirming the expansion of the universe, and he was really in a certainly sense, certainly one of the founders of the theory of the universe that we currently believe in. So he was a very important guy. He didn't
And,
continue for very long in science. He had other things to do in the Catholic Church. But anyway, that's an interesting
and
20th century example.
uh, Einstein didn't like it very much when Lemaitre first started to publish his, which subsequently has been quite well established by astronomical labs. The other
But
the other name that came to my mind as you were speaking about clerics who are also important scientists, and I think perhaps you knew him as well, Sir John Polkinghorne. I counted him as a friend. He came to my parish several times when I was in Stamford, Connecticut, and a brilliant scientist, an articulate spokesman for the Christian faith, and just a saintly and a godly man.
yeah, I did know him. I counted him a friend, not a close friend, but a very blessed acquaintance. And had dinner with him on a number of occasions. Yeah, he was very influential, and I would say his most influential um, writings are writings about the relationship between science and the Christian faith, science and religion. I mean, he was very much of a trained theologian and philosopher. As in his later years, was ordained and even served in local parishes before he was appointed to be the president of Queen's College in Cambridge, where he did most of his writing.
Yeah.
Um, Certainly a much more distinguished theologian than I am.
Well, we'll you're pretty distinguished. So, but I
Not,
do.
not
In
so much
addition
as a
to
theologian, but I know a lot.
yeah, in addition to Ian's books, I do recommend anything by John Polkinghorne. And one of his
Me
books
too.
is called The Faith of a Physicist, and it's a very beautiful book indeed. Now, tell us about your book. You wrote a book. The title of it, How Can a Scientist Believe in Miracles? Tell us about that book and where it came from, and how can a scientist believe in miracles?
Well, first thing to say about the book is that it wasn't my title. Publishers obviously have their own ways where they put things forward. The subtitle of the book is An MIT Professor Answers Questions on God and Science. And this book is based on essentially all the questions that I was able to gather from various recordings of Veritas forums that I have led. The Veritas forums set out to be events organized by local Christian groups at universities, in which they also invite non-Christian, atheistic, or other groups to participate in a discussion of something bearing on religion. And in my case, since I'm a scientist, the topic was essentially always science and religion. Um, but the most fascinating thing to me about those is that question time is when people are led to ask their own specific questions about this relationship between science and religion, and I do my best to answer them as best I understand them. And the book basically gathers over 200 of these questions together that I was the literal transcripts of the questions that I was asked, and seeks to organize them into different groups so that it's not just completely incoherent, and try to answer those in a more measured way, maybe a more sustained way than one can answer questions off the cuff in a meeting. So that's what the book is all about. It's all about basically the kinds of questions that young people these days ask about science and religion in those types um, of gatherings. Um, and so the question about can a scientist believe in miracles is just one of those questions in a certain sense. And there are 200 altogether. Or perhaps there are 10 or 15 that are in the topic of can a scientist believe in miracles. Of course, one can give a simple answer to that question, and the answer is yes. Scientists from the beginning of science have believed in miracles, so clearly they can. Of course, the implication is should they, and to what extent can they these days answer yes. To do so requires one to understand what a miracle is. So people have different understandings of what they mean by miracles. There is one approach to this question today, which is to say that a miracle is a violation of the laws of nature. There's at the opposite extreme, there is an expression which says, you should live life as if everything is a miracle. And that second one is sort of implying by a miracle something which is a cause of wonder and awe and so forth. And so the question really becomes, well, what do we mean by miracle? I take the view that we should, as Christians, we should look at what the scriptures, particularly the New Testament, tends to take as being a miracle. What do they mean? What does it mean by miracle? Of course, the word miracle doesn't appear in the Greek New Testament, since it's a Latin-based word in the first place. But basically, the New Testament refers to miracles as being either signs or wonders or mighty works. And in short, what a miracle means to me, and I think should be the meaning of the word miracle, is an extraordinary act of God. So it is some act of God which inspires unusual wonder or is unusual power or unusual significance. The academics will sometimes refer to these as special acts of God. So the question is, can a scientist believe in miracles? Well, yes, of course. Because if I believe in God, then I think God is active in the world. And I think that some of those actions will be perceived as being miraculous, the extraordinary ways of acting in the world. But a lot of people feel kind of nervous about that these days. And one cause of that nervousness is to say, well, how can these things happen which seem to be inconsistent with the laws of nature as we now know them? And I think that is perhaps the greatest stumbling block that we have today towards giving credibility to these, for example, the events of the New Testament, some of the events of the New Testament, which are thought to be miraculous. And the way I approach it is this: if we're concerned about the scientific description of the world, science is natural science. I mean, I'm going to use the word science unqualified to mean natural science. I'm not talking about political science or social science or any of those other disciplines which lay claim to the science word. That's a longer discussion. But natural science is the study of the world insofar as it is reproducible, so that we can discover its behavior by reproducible observations or experiments, and that reproducibility, and by the way, also a kind of clarity about the expression of how we describe and present the results of those observations, that reproducibility and clarity are essential to natural science. But the whole point about a miracle is that it's extraordinary. It's not the usual behavior of the world, or of um, things going on in around us. It's extraordinary, and so there's a great difficulty in science being able to prove or disprove whether something is in fact extraordinary. So that's one factor that plays out in this question of can a scientist believe in miracles?
Yeah. Well, I, I think yeah. I mean, a couple of things there that I sort of I track with my own thinking. I mean, one is that the sort of the work of the scientist is to understand the sort of the let's say the natural routine in a way. I mean, it's how can you get the same results with the same input under the same controlled conditions? It doesn't tell you about the one-off is a difficult thing for science to lay hold of and grasp. So that the miraculous is not necessarily a violation of the laws of nature, but something that, in light of what we know, is remarkable and extraordinary in some way. The other thing is that I think a miracle it's a sign that has at least the capacity to provoke faith. And um, sometimes the sign is there and it doesn't provoke faith. Sometimes extraordinary things happen and they don't provoke faith. I had an experience of healing in the ministry of healing prayer when I was a young priest. I prayed for somebody. It was a woman, unlike the woman in the Bible. She had an issue of blood. She was pregnant, and they thought they were going to have to take the baby because she was bleeding every day. And they didn't think that either she or the baby would survive. And she asked me to pray for her, and I did. And the bleeding stopped immediately upon the prayer. For me, that was the most miraculous thing that I personally had been involved with. She did not perceive it as an act of God. She perceived it as a marvelous coincidence. um, uh, I had the privilege of baptizing the child when he grew to adulthood, and he had perceived that there was perhaps something miraculous involved in his coming into the world. But it's interesting how, I mean, I think there is this thing about, Jesus does these remarkable signs in the New Testament, and for some they are miracles because they provoke belief, and for others, they're dismissible in some way. I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
Well, well, yeah, I think you've brought out a very important aspect, and the sign aspect of it, of a miracle is very, very important. I think that nevertheless, it's true that over history we've seen many superstitious beliefs have arisen, and within Christianity as well as in other religions,
Sure.
um, that someone of a scientist who appreciates modern science would be perhaps skeptical of, and also people who historians are equally skeptical of, not necessarily because of scientific issues, but because of human issues. So I think it's not unreasonable to question claims of miraculous intervention by God, and the Roman Catholic Church does. I mean, if you go to Catholic places of pilgrimage, and they have a special system in the Roman Church for deciding whether something counts as a miracle or not, and of the claims that they have, only something like 1% are actually validated by the church. And so there's plenty of superstition as well. So I don't feel that I personally believe every claim
Right.
miracle claim,
Right.
but I'm open to them.
Right.
And the reason why I'm open to them is, or another reason why I'm open to them, is this. In the first chapter of Hebrews, it says, God the Son, sustains the universe by his word of power. And so I take the view that God has set up a wonderful system in this world that works so as to provide the stability of the environment in which his creatures can flourish, in which intelligence and conscience make sense, and that it is sustained in large measure by what we regard as being the laws of nature. And that is the way that God, the Son, sustains the world. But if he is indeed not a deistic deity, one who has just sort of set the mechanism going and left it, and maybe, but probably not, reaches in occasionally and tweaks it. If instead he is continually sustaining it by his word of power, then it seems to me he is perfectly under has permission and is under no obligation to avoid sustaining it in a different way for reasons that he knows, maybe that we know, some of us know, but that he knows better than we do. And so I think if you take that view of that God, which is the truly Christian view, that God is involved in the world continually, as opposed to the mechanistic view, which the deistic view, which is that he is a distant God rather than an involved God, then I think it's easier for one to come to some peace with the idea that the laws of nature might not be inviolable. In fact, it's not necessary to think of the laws of nature as being inviolable. They have to be pretty good. They have to be observed most of the time, pretty much all of the time, in order for the world to have the coherence that I just remarked about, and for science to work in the incredibly reproducible and trustworthy way that it does. But we're not under any compulsion, I don't believe, to say that it is without fail every law of nature is obeyed. I can't hear you because you're
You got
muted.
muted there. It was a lot of noise on the street, and I didn't want to record it.
Thank you.
The, I was going to bring this quote up because I want to talk with you about the resurrection. But in the 19th century, there was a very famous English bishop, Bishop Westcott, and a great New Testament scholar and a great defender of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, against the kind of skeptical doubts that were raised about that in towards the end of the 19th century. And he pushed back against the idea of ironclad laws of nature. He said that there are laws of nature. They're not ironclad. They tell you what normally happens under ordinary conditions. They don't tell you about the sui generis event. And of course, he maintained that the resurrection of Christ was a sui generis event. So, but I thought that was very well said. I found that very, 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 very helpful. Um, we are coming up. C.S. Lewis says that the Christian religion is that religion, if of which, if you take the miracles out of it, you have almost nothing left, because at the center of the Christian faith is the miracle of the resurrection of the Lord. Of course, the story is about the death it's about the life, death, and resurrection of the Lord. You've got to keep all those things together. But if there is a sort of mind-blowing and stupendous miracle, it is that on the eighth day he rises victorious from the grave, and not and what they encounter is not a ghost or a spirit, but a human being completely transfigured and transformed, and bringing forth into the world a new form of embodied human life. So it is the church fathers talked about the resurrection as the eighth day of creation. It's the beginning of God making all things new. It is to be likened, I think, to the Big Bang. Nothing like it in the cosmos, except perhaps the Big Bang. Um, but it's challenging for contemporary people to understand, to embrace, to comprehend. It was challenging in St. Paul's time. He said, the Corinthians are asking him about that. They seem very confused. He's trying to explain that to them in his letters. What are your thoughts about the resurrection?
Yeah. First of all, yes, Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 says it's of first importance.
But first,
Um, and I don't think that
if Christ is
there's,
not raised, then our preaching is in vain. Your
yeah,
faith is in
exactly,
vain, and you're dead in your
exactly,
sin.
all of that.
Yeah.
So I think it's an essential part of Christianity, and without the resurrection, there isn't much left. Um, And I think it's challenging because it is one of these miracles about which it's very hard to believe there is some or understand how there could be some natural explanation for it. It's one of those miracles. I mean, that is pretty hard to explain on the
You could sort of make out how Lazarus could be resuscitated, sort
maybe.
of, maybe, it's challenging, but you could make a case for Lazarus being resuscitated. But this isn't that. This is
It's
something
not
else.
that.
Yeah.
It's not that. Um, And so I think that the question is, and let me say personally, um, the resurrection was a crucial intellectual part of why I became and remain a Christian. Um, is because I believe that the evidence for the resurrection is actually rather strong. Um, it's not scientific evidence by and large, absolutely not. And that's because it's not a scientific claim that Jesus rose from the dead. It's a historical claim. It's what his disciples reported, and all the evidence and the witnesses of the resurrection reported. And it has to be investigated on the grounds of history and evaluated as we evaluate most historical claims as opposed to scientific claims. So, when the anti-theists of today say there's no evidence for Christianity, what they're actually saying is there's no scientific evidence. I mean, that in itself could be argued about, but there's some truth to the comment. There isn't scientific evidence for the resurrection because it was a unique event, and part of history, not part of science. And so, I think that it's the case that intellectually speaking, the claims of his history or our knowledge of history generally is less certain than our knowledge of science, precisely because the topics are different topics and the uniqueness of historical events. But at the same time, I think there are very cogent arguments to say that the gospel reportings, and including Acts, for example, as the second part of Luke, were in fact the testimony of eyewitnesses. And Balcom's book,
I'm just going
Jesus
to talk about
and the
Richard Bauckham.
Eyewitnesses,
Yeah.
lays out in exhaustive detail.
Yeah.
It was pretty exhaustive too, but the arguments for it, and I think they're rather persuasive arguments. And there are, many other famous books, both recent and ancient, that have addressed the evidence for the resurrection and pronounced it to be very strong. And I kind of, my own investigation of that is that, yes, I think it's very strong, and it's a very important, that evidence is a very important part of why I'm a Christian.
Um, I talked earlier about I'm very much in the same boat. I mean, that was for me coming back to from I was very pious as a child, kind of got this idea that it was hip to be atheistic, and then came back to religious faith in my college years. And that was the final frontier for me. It was clear to me that the whole thing hinged upon the veracity of the resurrection. And could I embrace the resurrection without committing intellectual suicide? And I concluded that I could, and that there was great evidence for the resurrection, and that it could well. I think you're right to make the distinction between science and religion, and of course, in the nature of the case, there's no eyewitness to the moment of resurrection. There are eyewitnesses to resurrection appearances. Uh, um, but if it is scientific to have the best, most elegant, and most simple explanation of the evidence, then that it occurred pretty much as the apostles describe it is the best explanation of the evidence. Um, and of course, it's been argued very exhaustively in our own day by the this great trilogy of books by N.T. Wright on the resurrection and the people of God. And I wrote a paper back when I was teaching in seminary, and there was a man in the Episcopal Church, an Episcopal Bishop, John Spong, and he was a great proponent of what used to be called a spirit. He would say, I don't believe in a physical resurrection, but I believe in a spiritual resurrection. So he believed in the resurrection in the sense of a kind of the apostles had some kind of inner psychological or spiritual experience. He presented that as a very new thing. It wasn't new at all. It and the name of my paper was Three Bishops on the Resurrection. The first one was Bishop Westcott in the 19th century. Second one was Michael Ramsey in the early 20th century, and then Jack Spong. And the point of the paper was that these objections, which were being presented as kind of new and innovative and cutting edge, they were very, very old, and they'd been dealt with very successfully by Bishop Westcott in the 19th century and reiterated by Archbishop Michael Ramsey, the 100th Archbishop of Canterbury in the 20th century. Ramsey has this beautiful little book on the resurrection where he, you know, brings forward to us the teaching of Westcott, and the big idea in his book is, the evidence is not a slam dunk, and what you will do with the evidence in the end depends upon the premises with which you approach it. And if you have the premise that it could not possibly have happened, as the apostles describe it, then you will reject it. But there's nothing in the evidence that compels that. That's a premise that you bring to the work. And there was a New Testament scholar in Ramsey's day, a man called Kersop Lake, and he had this same idea that Spong thought he had invented himself in the late 20th century, which was that he called it a telegraph from heaven, that the apostles had gotten a telegraph from heaven. And Ramsey says it's not a very good explanation of the evidence. You don't go to your death for that. Um, and then, of course, N.T. Wright comes along and with meticulous scholarship, uh, leads us into a great exposition of, well, when Second Temple Jews, which were the kind of Jews the apostles were, when Second Temple Jews talk about resurrection, what does the word mean? And it does not mean, it means something, very, very physical. It means, you know, you know, faithful Jews are martyred because of their loyalty to the God of Israel. And then the Messiah comes. And how is it that they're going to be included in the kingdom of God? Well, they're going to be raised up out of the grave, and they're going to be included in the kingdom of God. So, N.T. Wright says if you had said something like a telegraph from heaven or a spiritual resurrection or something like that, a Second Temple Jew would say, well, it's good for you that you and your friends have had this wonderful experience, but why do you call it a resurrection? Everybody knows what a resurrection is. It's certainly not that. So the case, I think, the intellectual case and the historical case is is very, very compelling. And then you have to go on and say, well, why would these people die rather than deny uh, 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 the resurrection? And then you know, I I do think of the resurrection as this great burst of divine energy. It's this great burst of recreating sacrificial love that comes into our world that that Jesus brings out of the grave with him on Easter Sunday morning, and it has life transforming and even world transforming power. And you would just think of all of the expansion of the church, the conquering of the Roman Empire, not by force of arms, but by the power of the Christian witness of all the lives of the saints, of the art, the architecture, the literature, the music. Um, that this all kind of comes from some kind of befuddled misapprehension. It beggars the imagination to me. I think that the historical evidence is 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 extremely compelling. However, um, um, it's not it doesn't provide certainty. And the great Michael Polanyi would say, well, certainty is an illusion. What science provides you is not certainty. Science provides you with a proper confidence. And I think looking at the evidence of the resurrection, we can have a proper confidence, and we can trust our lives to the power of the transforming power and love of Jesus Christ, and find out for ourselves the power of the resurrection, which
Hmm.
which is, I believe I'm here today, and might well not be had I not encountered the Lord in that way.
Yes, indeed.
Well, we're coming to the end of our conversation, but we are coming up to Holy Week and to the Good Friday and Easter Sunday morning. Um, and I wonder if there's somebody who's listening to this conversation that we're having, and they've been very, very skeptical about the claims of the Christian faith, but they do perceive that there's a lack in their lives. They would like to be able to give faith uh, a hearing, to see if there isn't something more for them. Um, what would you say? What kind of advice would you give to someone who, you know, they're skeptical, they have confidence in science, they don't want to commit intellectual suicide, they don't want to kind of become, credulous or superstitious, but they really genuinely wonder if there might not be something to the claim of faith in Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I do address this a little bit at the end of my book, and I what I the main advice that I give is if you are serious, um, and you feel that there may be something in this, um, and it might be pretty important if there is, then actually the best way to investigate this, and this, my book is addressed perhaps more to students than to people of more advanced age, but I think the advice still applies. The best way to do it is to do it together with other people. And in the university context, there are many Christian Bible studies and fellowships and those kinds of things, and people are very much drawn to discovering these things together and asking hard questions and bouncing ideas around and exploring how this makes sense. And so getting to know what the Bible actually says is actually not a bad start, but doing it together with other people is much more realistic and enjoyable, quite frankly. than just, sitting down to study it and doing so in a kind of academic way. And I think that's something that I would encourage older people. Most churches, have opportunities for Bible study and related activities. Just warming the pew in a church is good. You'll probably hear some good sermons and get some new ideas from them. But if you want to dig deeper, let's say, um, than that, I would say that's my number one recommendation.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm not quite sure how much more I should say than that. Quite frankly, um, it is the case that there is no insuperable intellectual block to um, accepting the possibility of Christ being a reality, of the resurrection being true, and of the teachings of our Lord being significant and vital, actually. I think there are many ways in which Christianity offers hope to the world and to individuals that are good reasons for taking it seriously. And this issue of is becoming a Christian intellectual suicide, that's a non-starter as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I echo what you said earlier, which was that when I was considering becoming a Christian, there were people who told me I would be committing intellectual suicide. And I've just finished 40 years as a professor teaching at the number one technological university in the world, maybe in the galaxy. And I can tell you it doesn't involve intellectual suicide. Um, there are challenges to any commitment to principles, to um, following the teachings or of the culture of any aspect of society. But the Christian faith, to me, is a foundational and an amazingly attractive aspect of the culture that we find ourselves in the West. And in addition to that, my experience of Jesus and of God has confirmed in my life the truth and the reality of his love and his sacrifice and his victory. And that's where I stand.
Oh, so beautifully said. I really second, don't try to do it on your own. If you can, go and talk to a priest or a minister of the gospel, or maybe you have a friend who's just a serious Christian layperson, and speak with them. Um, uh, Jesus says, "When two or three are gathered together in my name, there I am in the midst of them." So that's one place where he's promised to reveal himself to us. So
Exactly.
I do strongly recommend that. There's so many opportunities now to go deeper into the Christian faith. I mean, um, Ian has a number of talks and conversations like this that you can find on YouTube or on the Veritas forum. Right now at our church, we're doing a Zoom class called Christianity 101, and there are things like that from time to time. There's Bible study at 9 o'clock at the Cathedral of All Saints every Sunday morning. I do agree that just going to the services of the church is a good thing, but it's even better if you can really try to develop a relationship with God's word, the Bible, and learn some of the great uh, Christian doctrines that will lead you and guide you. Learn a little bit about faithful Christian practice in prayer and in Thomas Cranmer's wonderful phrase, the author of the Book of Common Prayer, walking in such good works as God hath prepared for us. to walk. And all of those are ways that people can grow deeper in faith. I have a pitch that I give every Lent to my congregation and to anybody else who would like to encounter the Christian faith, encounter Jesus Christ in a more profound way. And that is, there are three services that are really kind of one service, but they occur on 3 days. And the services are called Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, and the Great Vigil of Easter. So it's the Thursday before Easter, the Friday before Easter. Thursday night, we remember what Christ did on the night in which he was betrayed, how he took the bread and the wine, said, "This is my body, this is my blood. Do this in remembrance of me." He also washed the feet of his disciples and said, "I give you a new commandment." The word for that in Latin is mandamus, so it's Maundy Thursday. "I give you a new commandment: love one another as I have loved you." So we have the liturgy is kind of a time machine, brings us back to that night, and then we're with him at the cross on Good Friday, and then the Great Vigil of Easter is called the Queen of Feasts. You go into a darkened church. The new fire, the light of Christ is kindled, and the deacon brings the Paschal candle, this great candle symbolizing the death and resurrection of the Lord, into the church, singing the light of Christ. And then we go through all the Old Testament and hear all of the mighty things that God has done, preparing us for the mighty thing in the death and resurrection of the Lord. If you do that Maundy, Thursday, Good Friday, the Great Vigil of Easter, it's a lot, and a lot of people can't do it, but I recommend it. I recommend it as a challenge and a spiritual adventure. Then you come to the service of the celebration of the resurrection on Easter Sunday morning. You'll have a much fuller experience. Those liturgies will bring you right into the heart of the Christian faith. And even if you're skeptical, I challenge you. Here's a spiritual adventure. Go and sit through those services, let it wash over you, and then find some Christian friend, a clergy person, or a Christian friend, to just reflect on your experience of those things. And that might be just at this time of year, one special thing that you could do to uh, uh, open a door to the Lord in your life. Ian, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been really a rich and wonderful conversation for me. My own faith has been encouraged and strengthened by listening to you speak, and to your testimony, and to your deep thinking about the relationship between science and religion. Any last thoughts or last words?
No, but thank you very much for inviting me. I have appreciated our conversation. I'm from time to time invited to talk to people about my faith, and I find it just uplifting to do so.
Amen. Amen. And we're hoping that the day will come and we'll get you in person at the Cathedral of All Saints. So we'll pray for that. Thank you very much, and God bless.
God be with you.